In this video, we'll be continuing my series of underrated albums of the 90s. The year is 1996. So for this video, I have 6 albums. I like to talk about these albums. I feel they get overlooked a little bit. I have a few bigger name bands here, but I'll justify my reasoning for choosing them. So with that being said, let's get into it. And as always, I divided the video into chapters. Feel free to jump to the band you want to hear about. So the first album I want to talk about is The Dark Saga by Iced Earth. This was released on May 20th, 1996. The album is pretty good. It's a concept album about the comic book character Spawn. I feel this one is a little more accessible than some of their other albums. There are a lot of songs I enjoy in this one, so for me, the songs that stand out are the 2 ballads. The first one called I Died For You, which is just a very melodic and memorable song. The second one is called A Question of Heaven. That's the closing track. It's the longest song. And it's just very melodic. I like the guitars in this one. They're very well harmonized. And it's a song that sticks in your head. And I also like the concept about the main character being rejected from the gates of heaven. And how he's like really angry at God because of this. But the album has some other heavier songs. For example, Vengeance Is Mine. It has some really great guitar riffs. And a really great emotional vocal performance. The opening track of The Dark Saga is really good because it introduces the comic book character. And it kind of tells a story, how he made a deal with the devil, how he went to hell, but he's able to return to Earth under certain conditions. So if you read the comic book, you would understand a little more. But I always like this album. Next is Morningrise by the band Opeth. This was released on June 24th, 1996. This is their second album, released on Candlelight Records. One of my favorite albums because it has a mixture of their heavy sound, but they incorporate a lot of acoustic guitars, elements of folk metal. They have some softer stuff. This is an album, it has only 5 songs, but all the songs are over 10 minutes long. It has their longest song called Black Rose Immortal. That's 20 minutes long, but this album is never boring. They change up their sound like throughout the songs, and it's just this very big sound. It's epic, and you have lots of acoustic guitars, some elements of jazz music, some progressive rock, some folk music, and you get some black metal and death metal. So it is a big mixture of things. This is the album with my favorite Opeth song called To Bid You Farewell, a song about heartbreak and loss. It's a song with only clean vocals, and you can't even really call it a metal song. It's just very beautiful. They have some electric guitars, but they're slightly distorted towards the end. But mostly acoustic guitars. It's over 10 minutes, and it's a song I listen to over and over. The other good song I like, Black Rose Immortal, has some really dark themes about a man like really desperate to bring back a loved one, and he contacts the devil to kind of like bring that person back. And I really love the album cover as well. It's just a black and white photograph. It just has a very dark and cold feeling to it. And the music is just very complex, and it's just going to evoke all these different feelings when you listen to it. So this might be their best album, but I don't know. Let me know what do you think of Opeth. Next is Great Southern Trendkill by Pantera. This was released on May 7, 1996 through East West Records. And it was a big album. It charted very high, but I feel it does get overlooked. I think a lot of people, they talk about Pantera, they always like gravitate towards either Cowboys from Hell, Far Beyond Driven, or Vulgar Display of Power. But this one, I think it's just very good, and it might get overlooked at times. It's probably the heaviest album. I mean, the album literally opens with Phil Anselmo just going into this like really like heavy scream, but they do like some quieter stuff like Suicide Note Part 1, and then they have Part 2 being like one of their heaviest songs. But on this album, the guitars are tuned down a little more, and they get a little experimental. They use some acoustic guitars a little more often. So some of my favorite songs are Drag the Waters, Tens, Suicide Note Part 1 and 2, and Floods. And they have some interesting lyrical themes in here. So the title track is about people who blindly follow like the latest trends. The song Drag the Waters is about people like having difficulty trust, or people you have a difficult time trusting because you're not really sure of their true intentions. And the song Floods is one of those rare times when this band looks to the Bible for like lyrical inspiration. It's about like Noah's Ark, but it kind of with the idea that it questions like, do people deserve another chance for their sins? So overall, killer album and one that gets overlooked. Next is Down on the Upside by Soundgarden, released on May 21st, 1996 through A&M Records. This is a very underrated album. Sounds a lot different than the previous ones, but I liked it a lot. I think this was one of my most listened to albums back in 1996. The one thing that stands out about this album was they took a lot of chances. They did a lot of different stuff. They also incorporated some different instruments. So, for example, the song Ty Cobb uses a mandolin and a mandala. Matt Cameron plays the Moog synthesizer on the song Applebite. Chris Cornell plays an electric piano on the song Overfloater, and they have some odd time signatures on this album. So, for example, Never the Machine Forever, that uses like a 9/8 time signature, and they use some alternate tunings on other songs. For example, Pretty Noose and Burden in My Hand used an open C tuning. And the album has more elements of like psychedelic rock and a lot of different sound textures. It's more of a rock album as opposed to their previous sound. You know, their previous albums were more like heavy guitar riffs, and this is one of those grunge bands that were always like closer to being like metal. But my favorite song on this album, and probably my favorite Soundgarden song of all time, is Blow Up the Outside World. Just reminds me of a psychedelic Beatles song, and even according to guitarist Kim Thayil, he said that the band drew inspiration from that late 60s Beatles sound. So overall, a great album, doesn't get a lot of attention, and I don't know, let me know, if, some people don't like this album, so let me know, do you like Down on the Upside, or do you think it's just one of their weakest? And two more. Next is Overnight Sensation by Motörhead. So this is album number 13, released on October 13th, 1996. And this is through Steamhammer Records. This is the first album after their guitarist Wurzel left in 1995. And they became a three-piece, and that's actually like the classic Motörhead lineup of Lemmy, Phil Campbell, and Mickey D. Now, to be honest with you, I was never the biggest Motörhead fan. I haven't listened to all of their albums, but out of the ones I have listened to, I think this is one I go back to often. I just really like the sound on it, specifically the guitar tone. And I think Motörhead is a type of band, they kind of do the same thing over and over, but on this one they might get like a little experimental, but like not too much where they lose their sound like the way other bands were doing in the 90s. They kind of like just tweaked it a little. So, for example, Lemmy plays harmonica on Crazy Like a Fox. And that song is really great. It has like this punk rock energy and just a great song to listen to when you're doing some kind of physical exercise or something like that. And just Motörhead, it's just one of those bands, they survived the 90s. They didn't really change their sound like too much. And the album has lots of great songs. So we have Civil War, that's a thrasher. And another one of my favorites, I Don't Believe a Word. And I like that because of that distorted bass guitar in the intro. It just makes it very memorable. That distorted bass can also be heard on the title track, Overnight Sensation. That's a real great one. It's a rocker. And the album ends with the song Listen to Your Heart. Kind of like Motörhead doing glam metal, but with some acoustic guitars in the background. It's a little different, but I think they did it well. They made it work. I think, you have a band like Motörhead. I think if they change it a little, I think it's kind of welcome. They're not losing their sound, but this is just another one. They have so many albums, but I think it just gets over. Last album I'm going to talk about is something different. It's the album Fashion Nugget, and by the band Cake. Their second album, released on September 17, 1996, through Capricorn Records. This is a weird band, kind of hard to describe. I guess they're like an alternative rock band, but they incorporate like so many different musical styles. It would be hard to list them all, but basically, like the sound is like a typical rock band with vocals, guitars, keyboards, and drums, but then they have a trumpet player, and he plays an important part in the band's sound. So this album, Fashion Nugget, was a big hit in the 90s. They had a hit called The Distance, and I guess you can call it like an alternative rap song, something like that. Then they did a few cover songs, like they had that cover, I Will Survive, originally by Gloria Gaynor, but they do it in a way like it's an alternative rock acoustic song, and it just really works well. They had this old Cuban song, originally in Spanish, but in English it's called Perhaps, 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 and they do that very well. They have a song called Frank Sinatra, just a really cool, like jazzy song. And they have a cover of a Willie Nelson song called Sad Songs and Waltzes. And this band is just very unique. Like no other band comes close to sounding like them. And they also sound like, or they come across as a bunch of regular guys. Like the singer just sounds like a normal guy singing in a bar band. Like they don't really have that like big, like this guy's a great singer. No, he's just like this normal dude. But I think that's like what people like about him. And they were pretty popular. Their songs have been used in TV shows like The Sopranos and The Simpsons, and they were big at one point, but I haven't really heard other channels talking about this band. And the band only has 6 albums. Their last album was 2011. Apparently they're still active, but haven't heard much from them since then. But it's one of those like weird bands. They're not metal, but I really like them a lot. So that's all for this video. Thanks for watching. Let me know about my picks. Did you think they are underrated albums? Are there albums that you go back to often? So I'll be back next week, 1997. See you in the next one.